Вітаю, мене звати Юрій Фізер на телеканалі Еспресо. Як ви всі добре знаєте, я веду міжнародні новини, розповідаю про те, що в світі говорять про війну, яка почалася в Україні ще 24 лютого цього року, як ми 3 місяці тримаємо оборону і навіть відтісняємо противника з наших земель, ну і як світ допомагає нам. Ну а хто краще пояснить і розповість про це, як не люди, які знають Захід, які знають світ, які працювали в західних структурах. Мій сьогоднішній гість – людина, яку ми доволі часто бачили в 2016-2019 роках на екранах наших телевізорів. Х'юг Мінгареллі, посол Європейського Союзу в Україні саме в 2016-2019 роках. Hello, Mr. Mingarelli.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining me today and to tell everything about what the West is doing to help Ukraine and what West will be doing to help Ukraine. Okay, so my first question is, to your mind, is the European Union doing today enough to make Russia pay for its aggression against Ukraine?
The European Union has no choice but to take a very firm and clear position in this conflict, because it's not only a war of Russia against Ukraine, it's an aggression of the autocratic Putin regime against all democracies. When the Putin regime decides to violate the sovereignty of an independent country like Ukraine, it decided to violate the core principles of the European security architecture. And therefore, we are under attack from the Putin regime, and the EU has to stand firmly by Ukraine. It's clear that, unfortunately, the Ukrainian people is paying the price for this aggression, with tens of thousands of Ukrainians killed, with millions of Ukrainians who had to flee their homes. But it is once again a war of the Putin regime against the democratic world, and therefore we should stand firmly by Ukraine. The EU in February already adopted sanctions against Russia. You may remember that already on the 23rd of February, just a day before the beginning of the aggression, the EU took a first package of sanctions to impose asset freeze and visa ban on a large number of members of the Duma and members of the National Security Council. The EU took sanctions as well against a number of state-owned Russian companies. The EU has imposed a restriction and sanction on a large number of economic sectors in Russia, such as finance, energy, transport, technology. The EU has decided to suspend the visa facilitation provision on Russian diplomats and business people. The EU has decided to impose prohibition on imports of Russian coal, on imports of Russian iron, steel, cement, wood, and numerous other products. So the EU has already taken 5 packages of sanctions, but this is not enough. The EU should clearly impose a prohibition on the imports of oil and gas. But as you know, we are facing a number of difficulties of that. The European Commission has already put forward a proposal more than 2 weeks ago now to prohibit the import of Russian oil, but unfortunately there is an Hungarian veto. The EU heads of government, which will meet today in Brussels, will discuss once again this issue, and I hope that by the end of the day today there will be a prohibition on the import of Russian oil, because it's very important that the EU stop to finance the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and therefore it is important that as soon as possible we stop importing oil and gas.
Do you think these sanctions are enough to stop Russian aggression, or maybe there will be someday the seventh package of sanctions?
It's not enough. We have to go far beyond that. We have to continue really to impose a very, very meaningful cost for the Putin regime, on the Putin regime, for this aggression against Ukraine and against the democratic world. And therefore, we have to do far more than that, because it is clear now, and it has to be clear for everybody, that the Putin regime just understand balance of power, and therefore if we can impose a meaningful cost on the Putin regime, they will understand that it is not in their interest to continue to pursue this military aggression against Ukraine. Therefore, we have to be as tough and as firm as possible in this confrontation.
Mr. Mengarelli, let's talk a little bit about 2014, because as far as we all know, the war, Russian war in Ukraine, started in 2014 after Russia illegally annexed Crimea and started the war in Donbass. And then the European Union adopted sanctions. Don't you think that these sanctions were a little bit mild, and they did not stop the further aggression against Ukraine?
You are totally right. The EU did not react at that moment in the right way. The EU, as you said, adopted sanctions after the 2014 Russian aggression in Crimea and in the Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast. They decided, first of all, to stop all summits and ministerial meetings with Russia. They decided as well to exclude Russia from the G8 meetings, and they took a number of steps to convince Russia that this aggression against Ukraine was not opportune, was not acceptable, but it was not enough. And a number of Western European political leaders who have continued to have a dialogue with Putin, probably convinced Putin that he was allowed to continue its aggression against countries like Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. And therefore I believe that it could have been opportune at that time to be firmer and stronger against the Putin regime, to impose the highest cost for this aggression, and to explain that it was not possible to have a dialogue with a country which does not respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of its neighbors. So I agree with you, at that time the EU reaction was not firm enough.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mengarelli, you already said that there is kind of opposition in the European Union as to the adoption of the sixth package of sanctions, and there are a few countries that do not want to adopt this package as it is formulated with a ban on Russian oil and gas. Does this mean that there is, how could I say it, there is no unity in the European Union right now?
It's clear that it's more and more difficult in this European Union with 27 member states to forge common position on sensitive issues. There is no doubt about that. It's not only about the import of Russian oil. When the EU try, for instance, to adopt a common position on the best way to handle migrants or refugees coming from Syria, from Afghanistan, it's very, very difficult to forge a common position. But nevertheless, we have to find a common position. And I'm sure that at the end of the today and tomorrow European Council meeting, we will have a ban on the import of Russian oil. And if Hungary continues to impose a veto on such a decision, we could have an import by 26 member states. This is an option. And maybe this is the option we will adopt. But I'm sure that a large majority of EU member states today are convinced that the EU can no longer finance this Russian aggression against Ukraine with the imports of oil and gas. And therefore, the Commission has already put on the proposals to cut this EU dependence on Russian fossil fuels and especially hydrocarbons, namely oil and gas. So we will reach a solution, I'm sure about that.
And I really hope you will reach and the sixth package will be adopted. I really hope. Mr. Mingarelli, why did some European Union leaders start to talk about appeasing Putin right now?
Well, we believe that it is in the interest of everybody to have a ceasefire as soon as possible. But it's clear that it is up to the Ukrainians to decide under which conditions they will accept a ceasefire. We are talking about Ukrainian territorial integrity, and therefore it is up to the Ukrainian people and to the Ukrainian political leadership to decide under which terms, under which conditions they are ready to accept a ceasefire. But I think that it is right to try and reflect on the best way to reach a ceasefire as soon as possible, because tens of thousands of Ukrainians have already been killed. As you know, the civilian infrastructure has been devastated in Ukraine. So many roads, railways, ports have been destroyed. So many houses have been destroyed. 6.6 million Ukrainians have fled their country. More than 8 million Ukrainians are no longer living in their homes. And therefore, we have to do everything possible to reach a ceasefire as soon as possible. But once again, it's up to the Ukrainian people to decide under which conditions. It's not about the Western countries to decide.
Okay, thank you. I understand. Mr. Mingarelli, since you worked with the EU institutions and you were the representative of the EU in Ukraine in 2016-2019, you know very well, so to say, the inner European kitchen, I would call it so. So maybe you will tell me and our audience, maybe you will tell when is it possible for Ukraine to actually receive the candidate status for the EU membership?
Well, the European Commission will deliver its opinion on the Ukraine request to be a candidate country in June. In a few weeks' time. In June. So in a few weeks' time, there will be again an opinion of the European Commission. Bon. Then we know that in the EU there is no unanimity on the way to handle this issue. Alors, all political leaders in the EU have already stated very clearly that Ukraine is a member of the European family. There is no doubt about that. But there is no agreement on the best way to integrate Ukraine in this EU family. Some member states, like the Baltic states or Poland, clearly state that Ukraine should be granted a candidate status immediately, and that we should start the accession negotiation with Ukraine immediately as well, so that Ukraine can join as quickly as possible. Other member states, like France, Italy, Germany, consider that it would take Ukraine between 15 and 20 years to complete the accession negotiation and to join the EU. And that, therefore, in the meantime, it is very important to set up, to create a new format that the French president called the European Political Community, in which countries like Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia could be integrated so that every time the EU heads of state and governments meet, namely between 2 and 3 times every semester, the political leaders of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova can be invited to participate in these meetings to discuss political issues and security issues of common interest, and at the same time to ensure that Ukraine progressively take over the core body of EU laws and regulation, so that progressively they can integrate a number of EU policies. This is the situation we have today on the table. There will be a discussion on this issue today and tomorrow in Brussels, and in June, when there is the next European Council meeting. I cannot tell you what will be the outcome of this discussion, but my suggestion to my Ukrainian friends would be, first of all, to implement as quickly as possible the current association agreement. Why? Because in the existing association agreement, there are provisions for a deep and comprehensive free trade area, which mean that Ukraine can join the EU single market relatively quickly. This means that we can integrate under the current existing association agreement, we can integrate the Ukrainian economy in the EU economy. And this would be extremely important, first of all, to improve the living condition of the Ukrainian people, and second point, to ensure that the European business people convince our political leaders that Ukraine has to be integrated in the EU as soon as possible. So this is the first point. Second point, I would recommend my Ukrainian friends to speed up the required political and economic reforms in Ukraine to unleash the exceptional economic potential of your country. Because if you carry out the necessary reforms, you will convince the European leaders that Ukraine would not be a liability for the EU, but an asset for the EU. Ukraine is a country with a fantastic potential. If you have a decent level of governance, you can convince the EU political and economic leaders that it is in their interest to integrate Ukraine in the EU. Because once again, you are a fantastic country with an exceptional potential. So please do all this and do not focus too much on the division within the EU. You have in your hands your destiny. And here, if you are serious on implementing the necessary reforms, in implementing the association agreement, you will create the objective conditions for Ukraine to join the EU relatively quickly.
And I really hope, Mr. Mingarelli, that people from our government will watch our interview and they will hear what you just said and what you just proposed, and this will help to quicken this process. I really hope. Thank you. So, some European experts, that's what I read, say that it is time to cancel the article of unanimity in decision-making process. They say it will help to quickly adopt very important questions in the European Union. What do you think? Will it be possible to do in the European Union?
What is absolutely clear is that the unanimity principle, which is applied today, is a serious obstacle to the adoption of a large number of policies. I mentioned the migration and asylum policy. The Commission put forward a proposal for such a policy, a migration asylum policy 2 years ago now, and we are not able to adopt this policy, despite the fact that the management of migration, of migratory flows, is today one of the main issues facing the EU. We cannot adopt this policy because there is no unanimity, and therefore I believe that we have to reflect very seriously on the possibility for the EU to move ahead in certain areas, in certain sectors, without the unanimity. If some countries do not want to participate in some policies, they can be left behind. By the way, that's what we have done with the Schengen area, which establishes free movement of people within the EU. Some member states did not want to participate. They did not participate. This is what happened as well with the euro area. You know that some member states did not adopt the euro as our single and common currency, and therefore some member states continue to use their currency. So I believe that this is a direction we should adopt and decide that if some member states do not want to deepen our European integration, they can be left behind. They participate in the EU single market. They participate in some policies, but not in others. This is, for instance, the way we should forge a common security and defense policy, because this is an area where the EU has to be really stronger. We are facing a number of autocratic regimes today, like the Putin regime, and it's clear that the EU has to be able to really adopt and forge a common security and defense policy. If we cannot have 27 member states together, we should move ahead with a limited number of member states.
Okay. Mr. Mingarelli, what does Ukraine need to do to get all the necessary investments to rebuild the economy and the destroyed infrastructure after the war?
Well, I think that the EU leaders have already clearly said that the EU will take the lead in the reconstruction process of Ukraine. It will be necessary, obviously, to have the Ukrainian government in the lead, in close coordination with the main partners, which will be the EU, the G7 members, the international financial institution. It will be necessary to put in place an international coordination platform, which will have to carry out, first of all, a damage assessment. On the basis of the damage assessment, it will be necessary to put in place a reconstruction plan to be adopted by the Ukrainian government, but to be accepted as well by the main partners, the main financing sources. Then it will be necessary to have a close coordination when it comes to the implementation of the reconstruction projects. We will have to agree on common rules and procedures. the Ukrainian government will have to put in place a very serious monitoring mechanism to monitor the implementation of the reconstruction projects. And the Ukrainian government will have to put in place as well a tool, an instrument to ensure transparency, accountability, and sound financial management. Hundreds of billions will be at stake, and the Ukrainian authorities have to show, to convince the financing sources, the international partners, that they are making the best possible use of this money, to convince the international partners to invest in the reconstruction of Ukraine. All this can be done because we have been already involved in the reconstruction of the Balkans, in many post-conflict situations, so we know what has to be done, and I have no doubt that the Ukrainian political leadership will take the necessary measures to implement this reconstruction program in a very serious way.
And we thank all our European friends for such a necessary help we are getting from them. Mr. Mingarelli, how strong is the Russian lobby among European political elites today, and is it possible to weaken their influence right now?
The Russian lobby in Western Europe is extremely strong and effective. And there are several reasons to that. First of all, the Russian disinformation ecosystem is extremely effective. With instruments such as Sputnik, Russia Today, and the social media, the Putin regime has been able to spread lies and to manipulate information in Western European countries without any doubt. Many people in Western Europe do not understand what the Putin regime is about. They are not aware of the fact that there is no political opposition in Russia. They are not aware about the fact that the Putin regime does not accept the sovereignty of its neighboring countries like Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia. They are not aware about the fact that the Putin regime is in countries like the Central African Republic or Mali, using mercenaries like the Wagner group to commit atrocities. So they are not aware of all this because, once again, the Russian disinformation tools are extremely effective. You should know, for instance, that in the Western European political class, many people are convinced that the Orange Revolution in 2004 in Ukraine has been mainly instigated by the Americans. The Russian media outlets have convinced a number of people in Western European countries that in 2013, when the Maidan, the Dignity Revolution, started in Ukraine, it was mainly because of the interference of Western countries. Many people believe that Russia has been humiliated by NATO and the EU since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So all these narratives have been spread by the Russian disinformation ecosystem, and unfortunately we have not been able to counter this ideological battle. This is the first reason. Second reason, to be absolutely clear, a number of Western European political leaders in countries like Austria, Italy, and France are bribed by Russia. You know that a large number of political leaders are members of Russian companies' supervisory boards. Well, the example that everybody has in mind is former German Chancellor Schröder. But you have many political leaders in Austria, in France, in Italy, who are exactly in the same condition. They are paid by Russian companies close to the Kremlin, and they basically spread and support the Russian influence in Western European countries. We have as well to be aware of that. And then you have many intellectuals in Western Europe who believe that Russia, as a global actor, has a right to have a sphere of influence, and therefore that it is acceptable that Russia limit the sovereignty of Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova when this country has to have to make strategic choices regarding their domestic policies or their foreign policies. Alors, these people do not express this view openly like that, but they say that the EU and the US should take on board Russian security interests. They say that we should understand that there are 25 million ethnic Russians outside Russia, and that Russia has to take care of these people in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Transnistria, in the Baltic states, in Kazakhstan. They explain as well, they refer to history to explain that Russia has a right to be concerned about what is going on in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Armenia. So they find ways to justify Russia interference in the political life of its neighbors, and therefore it's up to the EU, but to the American as well, to explain that this is not compatible with the core principles of our security architecture. It's not acceptable to violate the territorial integrity of a sovereign state. We have, all countries have to respect the sovereign choices of an independent country like Ukraine. But this should apply as well to Belarus, to Moldova, to Georgia. But in this area, a lot has to be done because, again, the Putin regime has been up to now far more effective than the Western European countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mingarelli. This was the last question for today. Thank you for your insights, thank you for your comments, and thank you to the European Union for all the help and support we are receiving in our war with Russia. Thank you very much. Ну, а я нагадаю, що сьогодні
Thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава! Дякую. Ну, я нагадаю, що, як завжди, щотижня до мене по скайпу включаються відомі люди з Європи. Ну, і я хочу і питаю їх про те, що в Європі зараз говорять про події, про війну, яку розпочала Росія 24 лютого цього року, і як нам допомагають. Сьогоднішній мій гість – людина, яку ми дуже всі добре знаємо, Х'юг Мінгареллі, посол Європейського Союзу в Україні у 2016-2019 роках. І він розказав нам, розказав ту внутрішню кухню Європейського Союзу і що там зараз відбувається. Дякуємо йому. Ну а мене звати Юрій Фізер. До наступних зустрічей.